Hey, good morning, friends. Today is Friday, August the 1st, 2025, and the time now is 7:09 a.m. So, friends, I want to talk about the so-called diaspora war or the conflict, basically the Cold War between African Americans and their African counterparts, or the Cold War within the African diaspora. So, friends, I want to talk specifically about two groups and subgroups. And I'm talking in this case about African Americans or Black Americans, because many do not want to be associated with Africa or to be called Africans. And also African, and I'm talking about the Africans from Africa as of now. And in terms of the African American group, two subgroups. We are talking in this case about FBA, basically meaning Foundational Black Americans, and also ADOS, ADOS, and we are talking in this case about American descendants of slaves. And also this specifically relating to the whole idea of boycotting African businesses. We are talking about African braiding shops or hair salons, and also African restaurants and other forms of businesses. Now, friends, today, August 1st, is a very historical day, but also a very interesting and painful day to observe in the African diaspora. Because for the past few weeks now, there has been call within the African American group to boycott African businesses, African hair salons, African restaurants, and so on. The situation between Africans and African Americans is not recent. It has been the case for a long time now. At least since my early years in the United States, it was the case. Now, friends, within the situation and in terms of this cultural/diaspora war between African Americans and Africans, there are many who are calling for the end of Pan-Africanism, which in itself is very interesting. Now, recently, one woman, an African American lady, went into an African hair salon and she had a terrible experience. So she took to Twitter, to the internet, and called for African boycott, basically for African Americans or FBAs, Foundational Black Americans, to boycott African businesses. And it took up steam in the social media sphere. And many jump on the bandwagon, to support our cause. It has been the case where many African Americans have been throwing some insulting remarks, or comments at Africans. One particular woman came up, or came on social media, stating that African Americans will eat anything but not eat African food. She mentioned that African food nasty, that Africans do not use proper salt or seasoning. Jollof rice is dry, the fufu is nasty. Basically, during my early years in the United States, those were the sentiments that African Americans directed towards Africans, stating that Africans don't wear clothes, Africans are chasing monkeys and zebras, and so on and so on. And those sentiments, those accusations or jokes that they made of Africans, basically for us young Africans, especially in schools, we had difficult times. But what is so interesting in this current situation, this diaspora war, is that it seems that many African Americans are not looking within themselves or looking at themselves in the mirror to acknowledge or accept the fact that, to an extent, they themselves did contribute to the disrespect of Africans or towards Africans, as many Africans have also been disrespecting African Americans. Within this situation going on, this diaspora war, many in the African American community, and most especially it is being pushed by FBAs, Foundational Black Americans, they are stressing that African immigrants and also other Black immigrants come to the United States and look down on them. They could be right, they could be wrong. Now, in every group, there are horrible people. Yes, there are people in Africa and also black Americans who do hold very horrible, terrible remarks or sentiment towards other Africans or other black people. But one thing that many need to acknowledge, I remember during my early years in the United States, at that time, BET used to be hot, and I remember watching BET as well. Every 11 o'clock or so, 10:30, 11 o'clock or so, after I watched the BET nightly news, African American comedians basically rained down on Africa, They said the most ridiculous things about Africa. And it was from these things that he said about Africa, these voking or these jokes, that African American kids basically made our lives miserable. Many will basically accuse Africans of not wearing clothes, We don't wear clothes, we are butt naked in Africa. They even stress the belief that it is not until we migrate to the United States that at the airport that immigration officers give Africans clothes to wear. Which if that's the case, it means that Africans flew on the plane for hours, butt naked. And if you look at it, to a greater extent, when Africans migrate to the United States, that plane ride could take up to 2 days, 24 hours to 2 days, because they flew to Europe, they will fly to Europe, and then from Europe to the United States. So if Africans are butt naked until they migrate to America at the airport and they are given clothes, so it means that throughout the flight, there are butt naked Africans. But then the white people, the Americans on those flights, they must also be a bunch of perverts as well, because it seems that they are liking the situation, watching naked people. But during my early years in the United States, there were times where I never wanted to go to school. Of course, I couldn't not go to school because in an African household, not going to school is basically like a crime. It is a state crime, crime against parents, crimes against their ancestors, and crime against all the family members back home. Not only your parents gonna kick the out of you in the United States, but everyone at home, grandmas and grandpas, uncles and aunts and cousins, everybody will let you have it. They are going to give you the talk, how you are messing up your opportunity. Once again, friends, upon migrating to the United States, right at the airport, that's where the family will give you the talk. Basically, when you go to that America, do not follow bad friends. Do not do this and that. Listen to your parents. Listen to your aunties and uncles. Focus on your education. That is the talk that any African from anywhere in Africa received upon migrating to the United States. So Africans migrate to the United States with a different personality and perspective. In many cases, especially during my early years in the United States in the early thousands, we had several civil wars in Africa. In the 80s, early to late 80s, we had several civil wars and destabilization experiences in Africa. So many Africans migrate to the United States with this mindset that this is all you have. You have a great opportunity, you need to take advantage of it. And because of that, there was this connection between or towards African Americans. Part of this also, many Africans are migrating to the United States where their English are different and they speak French and Portuguese in different languages. So in this case, communication between them and African Americans never worked. However, in addition to that, you have situation when African Americans will basically comment derogatorily against Africans or on African languages or accent. They also made fun of the Xhosa language, the language that clicked, the South African language or Southern African language. Those jokes that were made about that particular language, especially on BET, on anything comedic, basically got the highest, the loudest laughs. Any joke and every joke about Africans or Africa got the highest and the loudest laughs. So friends, as a young man in the United States during my early years, when I went to school, I always got into situation. There was a situation where the dirtiest kids in school that nobody wanted to be around, Nobody cared. The smelliest kid in school. Today, nobody liked them. Tomorrow, everybody liked them and respect them. And how do they do that? They went around punking on African kids. So a person might go and push an African kid on the hallway. The next thing you look, he punched the African kid, okay? Maybe he kicked him or so, and then the fight is squashed by the teacher. And that kid becomes popular in the school. He becomes known as the kid who beat up that African kid. And just like that, he was getting notoriety. In my early times in the United States, or during my early years in the United States, I saw immigrants being disrespected. African Americans disrespecting all other black immigrants. In the Caribbean, the rest of the islands were never regarded. However, despite all the situation, African Americans seem to have respect for Jamaicans. They never mess with Jamaicans. The Jamaicans were respected. As a result, us Africans, especially when our accents begin to change, we basically began lying that we were Jamaicans. And when we did that, we began to get respect from our African American counterparts. However, Haiti and the Haitians were the only blacks in the Caribbean who were just flat out disrespected. They were on the same level in terms of the disrespect that they received from black Americans and from the American culture. On the same level as the Africans. The Puerto Ricans, the Cubans, those Cans, those Latinos, the Amazonians or whatsoever. The women's were sexualized. The men were seen as fine by the black American women. But Africans, we get no respect, we get no notoriety. Everything about us was uncool. It was so bad in my early years in the United States that even Africans who came earlier than us, those who came when they were younger, who've adopted the black American culture or the American culture, they will act like they know nothing about Africa. They never want anything to do with Africa because relating to Africa means that they are not cool, okay? Now, in retrospect, the way the United States, the Western media portrayed or projected Africa to the Americans, naked people, civil war, huts, and all kinds of nonsense. In retrospect, it makes sense that African Americans, when they try to distance themselves from Africa, it makes sense. I wouldn't fault them for that. Because even us Africans, because we were so much disrespected that we were telling people that we were not Africans, we were Jamaicans. And that's how we were getting respect. Now, fast forward, even as an adult, I remember having such experience. I had a student, a Somalian student. This student, very smart, but he is known in school as, basically, among his peers, as an asshole. He is very smart, but many would say that he acts smarter than he is, and he is kind of belligerent or whatsoever. When I teach, I always use Africa in punchline to make example, in the very positive way, very positive, because I'm an African. I went through the stage or stages where I used to disown Africa. So as an adult, I began to realize that I was wrong. Like, look, Africa is not as bad as I thought it was because of how Africa was projected to us and about us to the rest of the world. But the other students used to love it. But this one student, he got so mad every time. And this student have told me many times that he's gonna get me fired. This student will say anything about me, insult me for no reason. One day, the principal called me in her office. The principal set me down, and this was a black African-American principal. She told me, look, flat out, before you say anything, I want you to know it's bullshit. The kid is wrong, and everything he said is stupid. However, because we are in school, what we do here is we have to accommodate the student and we have to respect the student's feeling. However, because of that, never use Africa as an example in your lesson again. And I look at the principal, I'm like, well, that would be silencing me, attacking my freedom of speech, my First Amendment. She was like, well, that's how the system is. We laugh about it. And I told one of my friends, he's like a big brother. He was like a big brother to me. He still is. Whenever I feel like crying, I go cry on his shoulder. He is originally from Guyana. He migrated to the United States at the age of 5. Whenever I had issues in school, even today, I call him and he gave it to me right. He will tell me I'm wrong if I'm wrong, and he gave me strategy. But I remember this man told me something. He said, look, To you, Africa is a source of pride and happiness. But to some people, Africa is a source of shame. It made me realize, like, wow, what did that Somalian kid think of Africa? Now, that was 2019. It is very interesting. 2 years ago, or a year ago, I got off the train. I was going to walk up the stairs to go catch the bus. I saw the kid. I recognized him. He came straight to me. How you doing, Mr. Blah, blah, blah? Look, I want to apologize to you for what I did to you when you was my teacher. I was an asshole and I was wrong. I remember everything that I used to do to you. And I willfully did it, but I was wrong. That was one of the most profound moments of my life. Like, he just came to me and he apologized for what he had done to me 4 years prior. And he remembered exactly, and he remembered my name. I remember calling my colleague and talking to him about it. And he was like, maybe the kid had a change of mind, something he experienced. So with all the things that I experienced in my early years in the United States, where African Americans used to disrespect Africans and say a bunch of nonsense, I have come to accept the fact that I can't blame them. The way Africa was projected and is being projected, it makes sense for anyone to disrespect Africa or to, as they say now, delineate from Africa. Now, moving forward, as an African, yes, many Africans or Africans are wrong. However, I want to tell the African American community that is this sentiment which had been propagated for so long that Africans hate African Americans. No, Africans don't. Africans, especially the very young ones, they emulate Black American culture and Black American people, African American people. However, the split comes when they migrate to the United States. That's when the split happens. They tend to live next to African American community. However, when they watch the news, it's a Black person going to jail. It's a Black person in trouble. They never see white criminals. Everything the media projected or portrayed was the fault of Black America. So for many Africans, they internalize these sentiments. Now you have people coming from Civil War. You have people who've been given the talk. Be serious when you get to America. And also, friends, Africa and Africans are very conservative. Africa and Africans are conservative as much as they are liberal. So the African parent, the African American kids and people are not serious. And they are saying that the African parents go and work triple overtime. He doesn't understand the situation with African Americans, and he or she internalized the notion that African Americans are not working hard enough, that they're lazy or whatsoever. In addition to that, we were seeing all these things where on social media, or we can say on comedy shows, comedians talking about, oh, Black people don't do this, Black people do this. It seems that the African American community have come to internalize a lot of the nonsense that comedians were spewing. And these things have taken hold in the African American community, and people enact it. Now, Africans, when they see these nonsense, they internalize it and say, yes, that's how these people are. One thing that Black Americans have stressed is the notion that Africans are disrespecting them and Africans are saying that they don't have no culture. Now, there is a misunderstanding to that, because even in Africa, our notion of culture is mostly centered on the indigenous tribal culture. When Africans say that African Americans don't have culture, that's what they mean. That the tribal culture and language or languages have been lost during the course of slavery. Now, during my early years in the United States, there are sentiments where African Americans would say, oh, at least I'm not Africans. Oh, you dirty Africans and so. And then an African person would say, okay, yeah, but what have you done? What have you achieved in your country? You are saying you are happy that you are Americans, that we from blah, 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 but you was brought here as slaves. Those are the sentiments that many Africans will say in response. Now, the African mouth is as smarter and disrespectful as the Black American / African American mouth. Both people are going at it. I feel like what needs to be done is both people need to sit and converse. We need to talk about this. But many of the stereotypes that African Americans are directing towards Africa or Africans regards or come from the fact that they've been seeing Africans or Africa represented in a negative light, and vice versa. Africans migrating to the United States, they see things happening on television, they see young men, black men misbehaving, they're internalizing that, and they basically go at it. It is the same thing with other black community in the diaspora or communities in the diaspora. But no, Africans don't hate African Americans. The disconnect comes when Africans migrate to the United States and they begin to internalize the stereotype. Now, in terms of what is happening today with the whole notion of boycotting Africans, honestly, I do believe that if the African American community, member of the African American community, and also the FBAs, if they believe that delineating, disconnecting from Africa will bring them respect, I don't know how that's possible, then by all means it is their right to delineate. But deny the African root, the African ethnicity or relations, it's not gonna end well. I do think that it's gonna be a blowback to that. Because all of a sudden, as of now, we do see that many in the Black American or African American community, whichever phrase you want to use, are also getting on the offensive against ADOS or against FBAs, saying you're wrong for delineating or for denying your African heritage. Now, friends, in terms of the current situation, one sentiment that is being pushed is the notion of detachment, or the notion that Pan-Africanism is dead. Now, I believe that Pan-Africanism is dead if one has the belief that the continuation of Pan-Africanism solely depend on the contribution or inclusion of African Americans. Pan-Africanism is bigger than African Americans, and it's going to continue. Now, friends, please tell me what you think, and I really want to know what you think. But friends, I'm going to end here. I want to thank you for being a member of the Echoing Voice community, my friends, but most especially and most importantly, I want to thank you a lot for watching the Echoing Voice. Peace.